Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in the LO3 podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful land of enchantment, and today's date is Friday, April 10th, 2020. I'd like to wish everyone out there a happy Good Friday on the faith of Christianity, and regardless if you believe it or not. However, with the character of Jesus, when he got crucified, he died for his sins. Remember, he was scapegoated for standing up on what was right. It's considered a threat to the tyrannical regime back then that was ruled by the Roman Empire and members of the tyrannical group with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Didn't like his rhetoric or exhibition. Even he infuriated the money changers because the temple was being contaminated or blasphemized. And what you see even now is knew what happened over 2,020 years ago. That was about, not 2,000, about a little over 2,000 years ago, to be very frank. Movements are happening, and you got folks trying to shut people down, digital book burning, same old song and dance. They don't want anyone's natural right to free speech, regardless where you live. They use the fear factor, fear mongering, credit scores like they do in communist China. Even the people in that particular jurisdiction are uprising or calling them out and saying hell no to them. And many of the global institutions want us to emulate that. Pathetic, unacceptable, and treasonous. Yeah. I was watching past week, Brian Rose is a show called London Real, and he had David Icke on. And I gotta say, I've been following Mr. Icke for about 20 years, read some of his books, and observed his information, the stuff I analyze too. And many of them call him a cornball, crackpot. But I don't see it that way. People don't realize it's a lot deeper than they want us to know. The universe is a lot more complex than what we think. He had the courage to call out all these frauds, shysters, con men, con women, including certain channels. And he got suppressed. I remember I was watching a little bit of a live feed. Then I had some breakfast. I didn't watch it in its entirety. It was in progress when it happened. Went on YouTube and boom. It was terminated. Am I surprised? Absolutely not. They're gunning for individuals like him for a very long time, including Alex Jones, Kelly Green, many others. Just giving you some examples. I know this for a fact. One of my shows had been taken off by YouTube, but I got it back. And many of the site profiles on Facebook and Twitter has been shadow banned completely. Yes, indeed. They want us to all be dumb, static, and happy, and wearing cowboys around our necks saying you are representing walking antimatter. You can't do a damn thing about it. Yeah, that's what they're trying to tell us. Rely on what they have to say. Look up to our lords and saviors in politics, the political realm. All want to point the fingers at each other, but they will still want to suppress the information, not to enhance ourselves. And what happened on September 11th is a very disturbing example we see about the whole COVID-19 pandemic. People call it a plandemic, a scamdemic. And there's some truth to that. Now, I'm not saying this virus or this synthetic specimen doesn't exist. That is irrelevant. Oh, cui bono, who benefits? This is what they want us to believe in. Their official narrative. Have us be tagged. Have us be marked. Give us our shots for our own well-being. Even you listening to the charlatans from the World Health Organization. Let's emulate the communist Chinese regime. So the question is, how long are you going to let this thing go? When are you going to do something about it? I'm not saying going around beating, destroying people, anything like that. Information war, that's what they're worried about. People are waking up, my friends. You may not know it. I'm not saying it's happening overnight. But it's going on in due time. It's not just in this nation, but global. We can make this world from a prison to a paradise. We can't get up on our knees and stand like lions or wolves or sheepdogs. Guardians, sentinels. We all have that energy in us that come out loose and let them know we don't owe you a confounded thing. Servants. See, it's funny about the news. They like to use officials, lawmakers, but they want to call themselves elected servants. I'm just saying an example of the United States. But other places as well that have democratic conditions on government. Banksters are realizing too. They're on the hot seat. Folks out there are questioning, and they're actually listening. People out there are listening, sharing, etc. You gotta give every single one of those individuals homage, including the ones that are the hearers or listeners, and sharing it with others. Always observe responsibly, without a doubt. Never go for face value, examine the fine print. Because what we're seeing right now, they want to miss COVID-19, a road to technocracy. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, just look at the results what happened on September 11th, 2001. The mind control propaganda. Hypnotizing us to go, yes, I will do as you're told. Or the Milgram operation or project. Yeah, you folks look this up. Pavlov's dog theory. Pavlovian theory, you'd call it. But and every single one of us can make a difference. Never say never. Things don't happen overnight, but in due time, it can backfire on them. And we can all spiritually prosper. So without further ado, I'm going to be talking a few things here. It's mainly two from American Free Press, but they, share information. They got it from other posts, and talk about that and accuracy of COVID-19, CDC, and all that. So I don't know if I did a little rant. So thank you for putting up with me for all these years. I'll just start off here from AmericanFreePress.net, and this is from, it says here, Ron Paul, end the shutdown. It's time for resurrection. This is what Dr. Paul has to say. For many millions of Christians, Easter is a time to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Others may celebrate the arrival of spring and the promise of new life. Whenever one's beliefs, after several weeks of mandatory stay-at-home orders and the complete shutdown of the U.S. economy of the coronavirus, this self-destructive hysteria must end, and we must reclaim the freedom and liberty that has provided us so much opportunity as Americans. To do that, we should first understand that much of the hysteria is being generated by the mainstream media that has long prioritized sensationalism over investigation and reporting the truth. Government bureaucrats are also exaggerating the threat of this virus and appear to be enjoying the power and control that fearful people are willing to hand over to them. One coronavirus bureaucrat even told us we can no longer go to the grocery store. So should we just starve? We should just starve? That's a question. Sorry about that. It is certainly possible to believe that this virus can be dangerous while at the same time pointing out that radical steps are being taken in our society. Stay-at-home orders, introduction of de facto martial law, etc., without very little knowledge of just how deadly is this disease. On March 24th, the CDC issued an alert stating that doctors should classify probable COVID-19 or likely COVID-19 as COVID-19 deaths. So assume, kind of, sort of, I think, I guess, possibly, perhaps that explains the seeming drop-off of pneumonia deaths this year and the simultaneous spike in COVID-19 deaths, as some researchers have reported. The BBC reported last week at the present in the U.S., any death of COVID-19 patient, no matter what the physician believes to be the direct cause, is counted for public reporting as COVID-19 death. Does that sound like a scientifically sound way of determining how deadly COVID-19 really is? What is the most dangerous is that although the virus will eventually disappear, the assault on our civil liberties is not likely to be reversed. From this point on, whatever local officials, county officials, state governors, or federal bureaucrats decide there is sufficient reason to suspend the Constitution, they will not hesitate to do so. Remember, habeas corpus is only good for invasion or insurrection. That's it. Anyone who challenges suspension of the Constitution for your own good is labeled unpatriotic and perhaps even reported to the authorities. We have already seen hotlines springing up across the country for Americans to report other Americans who dare venture outside to enjoy the sun and build up their vitamin D protection against the coronavirus. Yes, all you little snitches out there, you are scumbags in my book. Sweet Polly purebred syndrome. Underdog, save me! Those are the ones I despise, and your asses should be deported. I don't care if you're a citizen because you failed to fulfill your obligations on upholding your oath. As if you serve in the military, serve in the police, serve as in the government institution, or as a registered voter. We have already seen, sorry about that. The government is justified in canceling the Constitution, we are told, because we had an emergency situation caused by the COVID-19 virus. But do people forget that the Constitution itself was written and adopted while we were in an emergency situation? Did the framers of the Constitution fail to add an 11th Amendment to the Bill of Rights saying, by the way, none of this counts if we get sick? Of course not. Those who wrote our Constitution understood these rights are not granted by government, but rather by our Creator. Thus, it was never a question as to when or under what conditions they could be suspended. The government had no authority to suspend them at all because it did not grant them in the first place. Our country is far less at risk from coronavirus than it is from the thousands of small and large authoritarians who have suddenly flexed their muscles across the country. President Trump would do well to end this ridiculous shutdown so that Americans could get on with their lives and get back to work. Americans should remember the tyrants who locked them down next time they go to the ballot box. Let's demand an end to the shutdown so we can resurrect our economy, our lives, and our liberties. And that was originally from the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. He's a doctor too, by the way. And like I said before on my past shows, I'm not saying COVID-19 is a fraud. It's just how these people are implementing it that makes it disturbing, fraudulent, invalid. There's some people I know have friends of mine, and there's people I know who have gotten the virus and got sick. There's others who may have it, went right through because of their health. But he's right. It's time to break it up little by little. Get the things going. And of course, everyone sometimes are being drilled in their heads about wash your hands, and they're in bad health. You got to immune your body system. And I've been saying this for over a month. Even people down in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, I've been telling people about be vigilant on your health. Don't just take this for granted. We need to be consistent. Do I believe it's still a bioweapon? Yes. I'm pretty in that respect. If I hope I'm wrong, if I'm mistaken, I'll be happy about it. If we're incorrect, if they prove me wrong, if it's official, it's not. You know what? Then I'll accept that too. But everyone in those areas, especially in the big cities, those hotspots, everyone's on top of each other. Populated areas, like in New York, areas of Seattle, Los Angeles, even Memphis, Tennessee. I've been looking at the COVID-19 cases, and that's a hotspot there. But Nashville wasn't too bad. West Virginia, and all that. But there's certain areas, it's a hotspot because of all the density. And sometimes you got to look at the living conditions there as well. That does affect. Viruses do occur. Germs and all that. So that's what we got to do it. And if you want to get yourself checked, I recommend do it voluntary. If you want to be distancing, that's how I'm doing it. It's voluntary, not obligatory or conscripted. And I've been out here for over a month, and I've been in good health. Yeah, I got a cough here and there, but it's not. But I know one thing: it goes away. So you have to always prepare yourselves. So that's why if I share information on my Facebook page, I send it to Messenger, and I get some people get disturbed about it, and there's no intent. Okay, no intent at all. I'm not mad at them or anything like that. But to say, hey, check this out. If I post something or share something to you, my friends, it was never out of fear, but awareness. And that's how we have to look at these areas. If we don't, we take things for granted, then we'll be stepping on our own bear traps. So yes, I do believe in end the shutdown. We need to resurrect our economy, get rid of the whole and the technocracy has to be shut down as well. So, in this one here, American Free Press shared this on his page, and it was this from the Rutherford Institute. Lockdown powers is a slippery slope from hand washing to house arrest. This is what Mr. John Whitehead has to say. Yes, I am a member of this organization too, so go to the Rutherford.org, and you can say look the third sent you. It says here, just because we're fighting an unseen enemy in the form of a virus doesn't mean we have to relinquish every shred of our humanity, our common sense, or our freedoms to a nanny-state that thinks it can do a better job of keeping us safe. Whatever we give up willing now, whether it's basic human decency, the ability to manage our private affairs, the right to have the say in how the government navigates this crisis, or the few rights still left to us that haven't been disemboweled in recent years by power-hungry police state. We won't get back so easily once this crisis passes. The government never cedes power willingly. Neither should we. Every day brings a drastic new set of restrictions by government bodies. Most have been delivered by the way of executive orders at the local, state, and federal level that eager to flex their muscles for the sole good of the populace. This is where we run risk of this whole fly-by-night operation going completely off the rails. It is one thing to attempt an experiment in social distancing in order to flatten the curve of this virus, because we can't afford to risk overwhelming the hospitals and exposing the most vulnerable in the nation unavoidable loss of life scenarios. However, there is a fine line between strong orders suggested for citizens to voluntarily stay at home and strong armed house arrest orders with penalties in place for noncompliance. More than 3/4 of all Americans now have been ordered to stay at home, and that number is growing as more states fall in line. Schools have canceled physical classes, many for the remainder of the academic year. Many of the states have banned gatherings of more than 10 people. At least 3 states, Nevada, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, have ordered non-essential businesses to close. In Washington, D.C., residents face 90 days in jail and a $5,000 fine if they leave their homes during the coronavirus outbreak. Residents of Maryland, Hawaii, and Washington also risk severe penalty, up to a year in prison and a $5,000 fine for violating stay-at-home orders. Visitors in Alaska could face time and up to $25,000 in fines. If you start reading, even start reading like their state constitutions. I know Washington, D.C. is a district. Yeah, the U.S. Constitution. It's all null and void. I'll explain in this one here. Kentucky residents are prohibited from traveling outside the state with a few exceptions. Null and void. New York City, the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak in the U.S., is offering its Riker Islands prisoners at $6 an hour to help dig mass graves, also known as Potter's Field. In San Francisco, cannabis dispensaries were included among the essential business allowed to keep operating during the citywide lockdown. New Jersey governors canceled gatherings of any number, including parties, weddings, and religious ceremonies, and warned restrictions could continue for weeks or months. One city actually threatened to prosecute residents who spread false information about the virus. Null and void is free speech. Even their own state constitution, all this stuff they're saying that violates the Garden State's supreme law. Oregon banned all non-essential social and recreational gatherings regardless of size. I'll just keep going here. Rhode Island has given police the go-ahead to pull over anyone with New York license plates to record their contact information and order them to self-quarantine for 14 days. South Carolina police have empowered to break up any public gatherings of more than 3 people. Of course, there are exceptions to all of these stay-at-home orders in more than 30 states and counting, the longest of which runs until June 10th. Essential workers, doctors, firefighters, police, grocery store workers can go to work. Everyone else will have to fit themselves in a variety of exceptions in order to leave their homes for grocery runs, doctor's visits, exercise, family visits, etc. Throughout the country, more than 14,000 citizen soldiers of the National Guard have been mobilized to support the states and federal government in their fight against the coronavirus. Thus far, we have not breached constitutional crisis point. Martial law is yet to be overtly imposed, although an argument could be made to the contrary given to the militarized nature of the American police state. It is just a matter of time before all hell breaks loose. If this is not the fine point at which we cross over into an all-out totalitarianism, then it is at minimum test to see how easily we will surrender. Generally, the government has to show a compelling state interest before it can override certain critical rights such as free speech, assembly, press, search and seizure, etc. Most of the time it lacks that compelling state interest, but it still manages to violate those rights, setting itself up for legal battles further down the road. These lockdown measures on the right of the people to peacefully assemble, to travel, to engage in commerce, etc., unquestionably restrict fundamental constitutional rights, which might pass muster for a short period of time, but it can be sustained for longer stretches legally. That's the challenge before us. Of course, if these days and weeks potentially stretch into months-long quarantines, at the moment the government believes it has a compelling interest, I'll bet a temporary one, in restricting gatherings, assemblies, and movement in public order to minimize the spread of this virus. The key point is this: we may tolerate these restrictions on our liberties in the short term. We should never fail to be on guard lest these One-time constraints become a slippery slope to a total lockdown mindset. We must guard against more than ever before. It is the tendency to become so accustomed to our prison walls, these lockdowns, authoritarian dictates, and police state tactics justified as necessary for national security, that we allow the government to keep having its way in all things without any civic resistance or objections being raised. Most of all, don't be naive. The government will use this crisis to expand its powers far beyond the reach of the Constitution. That's how it starts. Travel too far down that slippery slope, and there will be no turning back. As I made clear in my book, Battlefield America, The War on the American People, if you wait to speak out, stand up, and resist until the government's lockdown impacts your freedom personally, it could be too late. What will be far worse, however, is handing over your freedoms voluntarily without even a semblance of protest to a government that cares little to do nothing about your freedoms or your lives. He's absolutely correct. He has a couple more books too. Another one here, A Government of Wolves. And those are things you should check it out. And he got some good content. And I recommend folks, please support him. If you can donate money, that'd be great. Even if you do it once a year, that would be good, because he has some great content, good information, and you gotta, like, everyone here needs to stick together. Okay, there's days we gotta toss our differences aside and focus on common interest. This is why, like I tell people, I am pro Bill of Rights, pro U.S. Constitution, even my state constitution. Article of Declaration of Rights and Bill of Rights and all these state constitutions. All you gotta do is read it. As I say, if you hear my past shows, I bring those to light because people have the right to know the truth. Those douchebags don't want you to know. I do. Yeah, that's why we gotta start. Excuse me about that. I get tongue-tied at times. Always gotta remain vigilant. Exercise your freedoms. The more you know, the more you learn, the more you implement, exercise it, the less you fear. They want the opposite. So what are you gonna support? Liberty or tyranny? All right. Speaking of COVID-19, this one here came from the Epoch Times. It's by Jack Phillips. CDC says COVID-19 is not the leading cause of death in the United States. Ambulance staff prepared to transport a patient from the Life Care Center nursing home where some patients have died from COVID-19 in Kirkland, Washington. Spokesperson says heart disease and cancer are the two leading causes. Reports saying COVID is the leading cause of death in the United States was disputed by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, which tracks such information. There are no data to support that theory. Jeff Lichtenshire, a spokesperson for the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics, told CNN on Friday, "We have a limited data on 2020 deaths by cause and no final official numbers yet for 2019, but we do know by looking at the final death totals in 2018 for the two leading causes of death in the U.S., heart disease and cancer. There is no way that this is at this point COVID-19 comes anywhere close to those totals," he explained. And that is true. And heart disease has been around, been a number one cause of death for a very long time. Even when I was a kid, okay? I'm 51 years old, for goodness sakes. I learned this business in my teens. So go figure, right? All right, so in January 2018 and April 2018, more than 234,000 people in the United States died of heart disease, while 199,000 died of cancer. During the pandemic, about 17,000 people in the United States have died, according to the data from Johns Hopkins University. A graph published this week by Dr. Maria Dalnichev, a San Diego-based physician, showed that the Chinese Communist Party virus caused about 1,970 deaths across the United States each day, Newsweek reported. The same graph shows 1,774 died from heart disease and 1,641 died from cancer each day. The conflicting reports come as Donald Trump and White House Task Force member Dr. Anthony Fauci have estimated that the number of people who could die in the United States might be far lower than initially predicted. I think the American public has done a really terrific job just buckling down and doing those physical separations and adhering to those guidelines, Fauci said briefly this week. The minimum number was 100,000 lives, and I think we will be substantially under that number, Trump said on Friday afternoon without giving a timetable. Hard to believe if you had 60,000, you can never be happy, but that's a lot fewer than we originally told and thinking. So there you go. So that's why I always gotta beware of the drama what some of the officials and mainstream news media has to say. Okay, so always gotta look at those elements, those statistics as well, my friend. Because right now, if you just go one area, one-dimensional, COVID-19, you get totally distracted. So that's an interesting report there. Observe responsibly, to be exact. So, all right, we're gonna do one here. This is by Mises.org. How the CDC prevented fast and accurate testing for COVID-19. This is by James Kettler. Came out yesterday. And it says here the coronavirus crisis has exposed how the federal health bureaucracy, i.e. the CDC and the FDA, has stymied progress and a quick response over and over again. Crucial to understanding and potentially preventing a virus spread is having a sufficient stock of diagnostic test kits. If tests are plentiful and used properly, infected persons can be properly quarantined and treated. And health officials may begin monitoring those with whom infected patients were in close contact during the incubation period. For SARS-CoV-2, severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, the virus causing the coronavirus disease, and incubation period can range anywhere from 2 to 14 days with a mean of 5.1, making it so in special importance that patients showing respiratory symptoms be tested as soon as possible. Early failures at the CDC, the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, began working on a test within the first few weeks of the virus global outbreak in conjunction with the Food and Drug Administration. With the federal government in control, all countries' eggs were placed in a single basket. Any mistakes were bound to carry wide rippling effects. On January 21st, all planned anticipations were suddenly brought to terms when the U.S. confirmed its first case of the virus, a 35-year-old Seattle man who recently visited Wuhan, China. The patient 0 has checked into emergency care center 2 days prior, which was able to send clinical samples from his nose, throat, and bloodstream on an overnight flight to the CDC lab in Atlanta. By the following afternoon, the lab has reported that the test had come back positive, and by nightfall, the patient was being moved to a small containment unit originally built to house Ebola patients. Despite these measures, the virus managed to infect others through some unknown carrier. The crisis at last had reached mainland America. On January 24th, the CDC digitally published information on its tests, essentially providing a blueprint for manufacturing them. It was clear that our clinical and public health labs had to be capable of testing in case the virus became widespread. On January 31st, the Department of Health and Human Services designated the coronavirus as a public health emergency, and 4 days later declared this condition for just cause of the FDA to authorize the emergency use for diagnostic tests. Emergency use authorization bypass the years-long approval process and accelerate the pace at which medical products reach labs and hospitals. The FDA at its most flexible. However, the layers of red tape still enforced during such an emergency were thick and tangled. Labs could only use tests that they had developed themselves. It granted an emergency use authorization, which was given solely to the CDC. On February 4th, all other labs were prohibited from using their own tests, though many were already in the process of manufacturing them. The CDC kits use polymer chain reaction PCR testing, a common and inexpensive diagnostic method that has been used for decades. As long as the test and clinical labs could ensure the clean lab conditions required to develop coronavirus PCR primer. Short DNA strands complementary to the SARS-CoV-2 viral sequence, there would be no trouble manufacturing kits. They were fully capable. Giving the CDC the sole power to manufacture tests, on the other hand, would ultimately mean that fewer would be made and of lower quality. But against the interests of public health and practicality, production was centralized with the CDC anyway, slowing everything down. For more than 2 weeks, all testing had to be conducted via mail in samples to send to CDC, as with patient 0. On February 6th and 7th, the CDC finally sent public health labs the test they'd been anxiously waiting. At the time, this was a total only of 90 tests, though each one could process 700, 800 patient samples, a suitable capability for the time, but one which would have to be expanded as the virus spread further. After receiving the test, the labs began to check them to ensure that they would produce valid results. However, nearly all of the labs ran into the problem with one of the test's negative control reagents, mixtures used in chemical analysis. The test reagents contained genetical material unrelated to SARS-CoV-2, and that was not supposed to react. That's how the labs would have been able to validate the test accurately. But in most labs, one of these reagents, called N3, I always say reagents, and I apologize for that, did react, causing the stir of panic that the tests were defective. The CDC publicly recognized its blunder on February 12th and committed itself to making quick demands. At this point, the only 3 labs not facing reagent problems out of more than 100 were allowed to continue testing. All other labs had to again send their sample to the CDC Atlanta lab, delaying results by up to 2 days, which would have otherwise taken 4 to 6 hours to produce, at the time when knowledge of the virus spread was crucial. To address its failure, the CDC initially planned to manufacture new operative copies of N3 to send to the labs that had difficulties, but this never came to fruition. Instead, for the next few weeks, CDC officials continuously declared that they were working on the problem, ultimately helping to equip only an extra 9 public health labs with the ability to test. The cocktail of bureaucratic incompetence and FDA lethargy left all other labs without usable tests as the virus spread undetected across the country. Finally, on February 26th, the CDC announced its grand solution that labs could simply disregard the faulty NG reagent and otherwise continue using the test as originally sent to them. That means there was never anything fatally defective about them in the first place, and that the test could have continued uninterrupted for the prior couple of weeks. The real issue at hand was not with the test, but with the changing the test protocol to reflect what many virologists already knew, that having a third reagent was superfluous to begin with. That's not even mention the 5 public health labs that experienced problems with reagents besides N3, to which the CDC failed to propose a solution. So it was like running amok. But just when most labs had at last resumed testing, a new, through unsurprising, problem presented itself. Test kits were in short supply. The amount of kits distributed at the beginning of February was nowhere near enough to confront the hordes of patients requiring testing by the end of the month, without sufficient ability to diagnose patients over the course of the month. The crisis quietly intensified. Feds behind the curve. The CDC data records only 24 confirmed cases of coronavirus in the U.S. by the end of February, a seemingly manageable number, but it was later learned that by the time of a whopping 597 infected individuals had already begun to show symptoms. Each of these cases required testing, as did the thousands more who mistakenly feared themselves to be infected. Virologists knew the reality of the matter to be much worse than the official figures were reflecting. Scarier yet is likely that, without knowing it, the U.S. had in excess of 1,700 cases by February 29th, when asymptomatic carriers are taken into account, a far cry from the mere 24 that had been confirmed by that date. Much testing was needed right away, even if that wasn't immediately apparent. But then, at the moment of critical importance, the FDA updated one of its emergency test policies, allowing certain certified labs to use their own tests before the FDA review. A deus ex machina in the diagnostics narrative. The same day, a test from New York's Wadsworth Center was also granted an emergency issue authorization. Approval of many more tests beginning in mid-March followed. The FDA could only salvage the testing situation by releasing its tight stranglehold over it. After all, the whole debacle has originated and further worsened under the federal government's watch. It was simply unable to manage the crisis correctly. But even after giving innovation from room to operate, shortages did not immediately disappear. The first few weeks of a virus spread are always the most pivotal, making it very difficult to catch up if that precious time is squandered. The insufficiencies in diagnostics experienced early on allowed the coronavirus to spread more quickly and widely, causing an untold number of deaths later. If the FDA had properly vetted the CDC's tests before distributing them, everything might have been different. If public health labs had not, for weeks, been barred from using the tests sent to them, everything might have been different. If clinical labs could have used their own tests from the beginning, everything might have been different. But none of that happened. In fact, the worst of the worst happened when it came to test kits, and the blame for that lies solely with the federal government. My oh my. You guys gotta question these areas, folks. And this is why when the government knows best, they believe in 10 pounds cement in a 5-pound bag. You can't overstuff it. You gotta do things by space and finesse. So this is why, like I remember I seen the show a while back. You can get these actually self-testing kits. I posted on Facebook. It was like Sunday I did that. It was a real good show, and you could test yourself if you had the virus or you recovered from it or not. And people said they're pretty pleased about it. But the bottom line is, folks, if you're going to test yourself for these things, do it on your own terms. So for your family's sake, not the state's not the government's conditions. All right, trust me on that, because look what happened here. Amok Productions has done it again. And that is it. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or maybe something that's interesting I want to check out, whatever you do, please share your correspondence with decorum. In addition, I shall leave all the footnotes of this episode on my Spreaker page. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniacal resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. And may your guardian spirits be with you.